This is a relay project.
The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis.
Welcome back to The Discourse. It was a tough week for the governing party in Alberta last week. The UCP had to reverse course on two policies last week. Bill 20, an act that would bring political parties into municipal elections and give the province power to overrule bylaws and remove councillors at the cabinet's discretion. And after a funding decision that was met with instant and quite ferocious pushback, the province has decided not to cut funding for low-income transit passes after all.
And not uncommon to any political party, but no government wants to walk back any policy or piece of legislation. But sometimes, as we've seen now, and we'll talk about some other historical events, public pushback can influence government to go a long way to backtracking on some of their policies. The UCP isn't alone, as I mentioned, dating us back to, we'll talk about some other things that have happened in Alberta. But what we've seen both in Oregon and actually BC, the NDP out there have backtracked on the decriminalization of illegal drugs.
So we thought it was timely in today's episode to look at the political walkback, why and how it happens. And we'll look, as Erica said, at some of the higher profile examples, including one that I lived through very closely, the Alberta NDP's Bill 6.
Yeah, so, which as many of us will remember. So Bill 6, there's a bunch of Bill 6s, but Albertans, especially conservatives.
The Bill 6.
Yes, the Bill 6 it was labor changes to target farm workers. Specifically, the biggest issue was the family farm at this time, and it received massive blowback. It was one of the first pieces of legislation introduced by the NDP when they took office in 2015. And I can tell you, I've referenced Bill 6 many a times, Cheryl, when we've gone head to head. It's like the gift that keeps giving, and we've seen the UCP leverage that in both elections.
Or take full advantage of it and offer miscommunication. But we'll get to that when we get to Bill 6. The thing that's happening right now in Alberta, of course, I lived through all of Bill 6, and I think enough time has passed that we can have a pretty honest conversation about what really happened there, what the government strategy was, and how we tried to course correct. And we can compare that with some of the things that are happening more currently here in Alberta, after receiving loud, and I will say quite effective criticism from the Alberta municipalities and other stakeholders, Minister McIver released a statement announcing the government would amend its own bill. Again, not something that governments love to do. And the statement in part says, "We will be working with municipalities to propose amendments to the legislation and clarify that this would only be used in very limited circumstances. Additionally, this legislation sets out a process through cabinet to repeal or amend municipal bylaws. This is quite serious, and we would not do this lightly. We will be working with municipalities to propose amendments for the legislation and clarify that this would only be used in very limited circumstances related to the areas that are primarily overseen by the province, like healthcare, education, the provincial economy, or public safety."
Yeah, so
why didn't we start here?
Well, I mean, that's a fair question. And the interesting thing is actually how quick the government came in with these amendments. So for our listeners, the bill is introduced in first reading. It is now sitting in second reading, which has time associated to discuss. And then it'll go to committee of the whole. So where the actual amendments and fulsome debate and changes to the current bill occur. So the government actually quite quickly recognized the flaws in their policy and
How
came
could they
out.
not?
Well, yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, your first problem on this is, and we talked about this last week and on Ryan Jesperson this week, is if you don't have your key stakeholders, and in this case, Alberta municipalities, either in your news release or standing up, or at least not crapping on your policy, that's the goal, is to get your third-party validators out acknowledging this. Now, the government has brought forward even this week some changes or highlighting different parts of the bill, and I know we'll get to that, but it was a miss out of the gate. I think that as though it's not the case, because it is a big process to change, especially these huge pieces of legislation that they are looking at amending. It looks pretty quick and dirty on not having your stakeholders there. So it's just a big miss by the government by not having done it right out of the gate, and took a lot of heat and responded quite quickly, I think, highlighting that they will work with municipalities. But I think that should have been very clear from the outset, and that it is in the most extreme cases. But yeah, what did you think? I mean, what do you think of the actual amendments and the stuff that the government came out with this week?
So I want to just go back first, because I think it's wild that this happened in the first place. As we've talked about before, I ran communications in the government of Alberta on the political side for 4 years. I know exactly what the announcement rollout template looks like. And granted, it could have changed in the time that I've been gone from government. But I imagine that they didn't drop the piece that said, who is going to support this bill? What will they say? Who is going to oppose this bill? What will they say? And if the government didn't have Alberta municipalities in that document, in that spreadsheet, and have a plan to deal with them, they are either wildly inept or they just don't care. And neither one of those things is good for Alberta. Neither one of those things is good for municipalities. It's crazy to think that you wouldn't either have your key stakeholders on side before the announcement or be absolutely prepared for them to push back on what you've put forward. And the government, in this case, didn't do either.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. That was actually my job when I was in Redford's communications office. And I mean, I'm not surprised by anything because I lived through Sky Palace and I won't talk about it, even though you'll talk about Bill 6. But I think the thing is that is part of the communication plan. It's a strategic comms plan 101, right? Like, who are your stakeholders, positive, negative? What are they going to say? Maybe they just... I don't think it was intentful to piss off municipalities. I don't think as a whole or the association, again, I think when the Alberta municipalities were coming out, because as we've seen across the province, the smaller municipalities aren't really seeing this bill as quote unquote scary as I think Edmonton and Calgary are. I think we'll see in the next little bit what this government's relationship with Edmonton and Calgary is going to look like, because that'll be very telling on the why behind this. But I don't think that they ever intended that their key stakeholder was going to come out as aggressively as they did. I know that the Alberta municipalities was doing town halls and stuff this week with their members to be able to get some feedback. Again, several mayors have come out in support of a lot of the pieces of this legislation. Obviously not Sohi or Gondek, but I do think that this was definitely something that they didn't even anticipate. And I'm sure there's a press secretary out there that's just loving their life.
Oh, yeah. But it's interesting because it's not that this government hasn't faced opposition to its policies in the year since the election. We saw huge pushback on the proposal to pull Alberta out of CPP and create Alberta's own pension program. We saw huge pushback and quite loud pushback on the access to medical for transgender youth. And on neither of these occasions, I mean, certainly on the first one, the government has all but gone completely quiet. But on the second one, the government has pushed ahead. So in this specific policy, they felt that the pushback was so effective and so strong and would keep going. They felt that to a point where they actually are walking this piece back and amending their own legislation. So maybe talk about, why this particular pushback for the UCP was effective and why the other ones are something they feel like they can work through.
Well, I think it's possibly because of their communication challenge, right? Like, they still believe in the policy as policy's written. And I think where those other pieces differ is like they truly believed in the policy, how it was communicated. I mean, we're looking at the transgender, how they communicated that and rolled out was very, very strategic in having the premier release a video. So I don't think it got into the nitty gritty of the policy, where this actually got pushed back, not on the politics, but the policy side of it. And they flawed on their communication to be clear that we are going to work in regulations as you do with your stakeholders. We are going to make these thresholds. We are going to work with our partners. And I think that it was just a miss on how they did that, where compared to the other stuff where I think that they believe that they had a good communication strategy rollout and that the policies were solid, where this one there was so much subjectivity or ability for interpretation that didn't work well for them.
Well, and I think like some of it is like stickiness, right? Like how much does the majority of the population nod their heads when they hear opposition to the government's legislation? And how much of an impact will that have on the long-term credibility of any government in power? Those are the things that governments consider when they have to make the decision, are we going to stick it out or are we going to walk it back? And that is a tough decision to make because every time you do a reverse course, and sometimes, you know, you get points for humility, you get points for being honest, you get points for listening. But if you do this enough times, you start to look like you don't know what you're doing. And you start that credibility of the government starts to be eaten away. The province also walked back another ridiculous decision recently to cut funding to low-income transit passes in Calgary and Edmonton, reportedly as a budget balancing exercise. But as you can imagine, because this is life-changing for so many people who are low income, the cities immediately pushed back on this. It would mean the programs would end. And given really the lack of logic in the decision and the province's inability to defend it, it's not surprising that in this case, again, a very, very swift walk back from the province to say, you know, thank you for your feedback. We will not do it. Which, you know, that's a short window for the media. They had a problem. They fixed it. That is out of the media now. But, you know, had it gone longer, like Bill 20 is, it does start to eat away at the credibility.
It's definitely, I mean, you mentioned humility, and I will always take more humility in politics. You know, we tried something, didn't work, like we need to fix it, or, you know, we didn't consider this stakeholder group, or we didn't do anything, and like now we're fixing it. I think you're right. Like there is a balance, and there's some governments that will never have humility or never take blame for decisions. I don't think that serves them well. In the case of Bill 20, I think that they were as quick as they could be. Like they were reactive, though, unfortunately. Where it comes to the low income bus passes, you and I know how this works, where like the minister will say, like, we need to find efficiencies, we need to get the budget to X amount, and department folks do the best they can to find some of those efficiencies. Currently, these cities pay 80%, the government pays 20% of these low income. If you're, you know, a policy analyst in the government, you might be like, oh, well, this is actually 2.8 million or whatever it was. Savings that we can have. This helps chip away at the goal of finding efficiencies. The minister isn't, some are, some aren't, but like, I mean, Minister Nixon's quite a veteran in this, and he came out saying like, I just didn't know. And I actually believe that to be true. I think that's one,
just
humility.
Didn't know what?
He said that he wasn't aware that that was the budget line cut, that was the impact of it. And so he said, yeah, of course we reversed it. Like this happens. The whole job of, I mean, the public and government and democracy is like, if the trickle down effect, there's a problem and it's impacting people, of course the cities should have brought that forward. And then the government can say, crap, we didn't know that was the implication or that this would have the impact, because it was. I mean, it's a very minor budget item or number that as the minister, yes, you're looking through your budget, but you might not know the nitty gritty details of what the impacts are.
But I mean, that's a little bit of a cop out. Like
I think governments do it all the time. I think you guys had some, the other one would be like hotel or what's it called, motel medicine or whatever. That was a huge miss by the department and administration of AHS. It was discussed, found. Sure, like an opposition took advantage of it. The government realized like, hey, this whistleblower highlighted a problem and we were able to solve it. Like nothing's perfect.
Okay, but let's talk about...
No government or everyone's doing anything perfect. I think this is a prime example of the government let me
just make my point.
Okay, fine.
If a line is cut from a minister's budget, that line never gets cut without them checking the box, without them saying, I understand.
I'm not saying he didn't know that. I'm saying what he didn't know. But like,
if you're not asking the question, when we're cutting millions of dollars from a budget, who does this impact and what are the policy implications? You are not doing your job. It's not okay to just say, I didn't know.
You could have someone tell you in your department who you trust say, well, we only contribute a small portion to the city, and therefore we interpret that as not being this critical impact in which it had, when in reality it didn't, right? Like people in departments are great and do what they do, but they might have looked at their risk reward. Like I can't speak for the individuals or the sector of that department that made that decision or recommendation to the minister. They would have said, yes, we're cutting this because we actually pay a small portion and it turns into, you know, and the minister would have been like, I don't see it making that big of a impact as we've now seen it does. So, again, this happens more often than not, is that you put a policy forward and you don't realize the domino effect. As good governance, you then own it and amend it and move on.
I mean, fair. I mean, I would not say that this is a government, that the UCP is a government that has historically done a very good job at admitting that they've made mistakes and fixing them. Tylenol Gate is a great example. Importing, millions of dollars, paying millions of dollars for Tylenol that we could never use, but never saying that it wasn't a good idea. Having doctors say that it wasn't a product that could be used, never admitting that the government shouldn't have done that in the first place, never admitting that it wasted tons of taxpayers' dollars. CPP, we're just going to go quiet about that and not talk about it, even though the government has rolled out a plan that is
but there wasn't
widely
legislation on
unpopular.
It. Maybe they're quiet because they had an idea, and I always support bold, fresh ideas to solve
then
problems.
Then come out and say we've decided to shelve it.
Well, and
that's being honest. That's showing
that
humility.
might be a thing. Who knows, right? Like if it does, then I'm
you're listening,
yeah. Eric and Cheryl, just like if you're going to quit something, just say it, right? And that's a fair point. I don't know where the government is, frankly. If we don't have an episode where we don't have to talk about the pension, I'm totally cool with that.
We've had like 5 episodes about the pension.
That's what I mean.
I think we're due for one.
Like we're like 1/5 of our episodes are focused on pension. But no, I mean, I think that there is a fine line. There's some points I would give to the NDP. I think it took a long time for them to ever admit that around carbon tax. There is one that you guys own, and that I think is one that
it's because it was the right thing to do.
And I would say I think that
unpopular.
there's been a lot. What, you think Bill 6 was the right thing to do?
No, carbon tax.
Oh, I was like, ooh. I mean,
we can get to Bill 6.
I disagree with you on that one, but this episode isn't about the carbon tax. I think there's ones where it takes a while for humility to come in. There's times where government can just say, we effed up and we're making that correction. I hope that is what we're going to see with Bill 20 and the amendments that we'll see probably sometime next week.
Can't wait.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of walkbacks and where your team did wrong, the BC
what a setup.
The BC NDP has also reversed course last month. The province has now asked Health Canada, so they had previously
and been approved,
asked
actually, now that as of yesterday.
Oh, good. Yay, it's approved.
Yeah,
I'm shocked by that. To reintroduce the ban on public drug use after the province decriminalized illicit drugs use in the public. So they had to get an exemption from the federal government that was blessed upon by the NDP Liberal Coalition, who loves giving out drugs. And now they're complying with the government to reverse course because it's wrong. This is, and I want your take. Do you think, and I don't know how connected or how closely you work with BC NDP, but like it also, as I mentioned in our opening, like this is a big change from what Oregon did. They reversed course like a month or two ago. They were kind of the trailblazers in the US. The BC is the trailblazers in Canada on decriminalizing drugs. Both realized it's a horrible, horrible idea and now are coming to common sense and asking for that to be overchanged. But after a memo was leaked, the instructed nursing staff not to intervene with patients illicit drugs or using illicit drugs in their room. Stories started to come out of nurses walking through fentanyl smoke. I think most of our listeners can relate to seeing a lot of that come out in BC about safety being a huge concern, about hospitals, and hospital staff, as well as just the general public, where it kind of got out of control. Even members of that community were like, you're not helping this. You're really just allowing us to do whatever we want, wherever we want. So let's throw quickly to a clip with Premier David Eby as he announces that he's asked the federal government, which has now been granted, for them to step in and reverse course.
We today have made a formal request to Health Canada to amend the exemption to the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, which will give the police the tools they need to enforce the law anytime someone is using drugs in an inappropriate location and compromising public safety. In short, this amendment will make public drug use illegal in British Columbia.
I think BC struggled with this. I think this was they really felt like they were doing the right thing in terms of harm reduction when they brought this policy in. But it is, again, a really hard narrative to combat when you have frontline nurses say, I can't go home and breastfeed my baby because I was exposed to fentanyl smoke today. And there's no one in the province who hears that and says, that is okay. That is the society that I want to live in. And so I think it was the right decision. Again, I think it shows humility for the government to say, we tried it because, this is a problem across Canada. Jurisdictions are trying different ways to approach it. BC tried this way, and as it was standing, it wasn't working. And it was, on the politics side of it, really hurting them ahead of a fall election. So I think it was the right thing to do. And politically, I think it was the right thing to do for them to just change the channel, because the opposition, both opposition parties, had such an incredible narrative to push to the government that they didn't care about public safety, that they were putting, drug users' right to use illicit drugs above the safety of frontline health staff. That just doesn't work for anybody in BC, and certainly doesn't work for the NDP space.
So you have an interesting point, and I want to get, when we talk about walking it back, both our parties, when we talk about Bill 6 and this one, are quite a far distance out from an election. Do you think that the BC NDP would have walked it back? Or what's your take on them truly believing it was the wrong thing, or they were just losing the narrative on it and there's an election coming up?
Well, I think at this point in the election cycle, everything is heightened. But I do think at any point in the election cycle, this would have been a problem. This was a pilot to begin with. And so you put it out, you say, we're going to try it, we're going to see how it works. It clearly was not working the way that it was intended to work. If you have frontline staff that cannot come to work, if you have hospitals that are making people more unhealthy when they leave the hospital, that's not working. And I think the conversation around public safety is a real conversation in BC. The NDP has tried to stand itself up as working towards public safety, making sure that streets are safe for the communities. This eats away at the credibility of that policy. And when they're going into an election where that will be one of the number one talking points of their opposition, they need to have something to say about it. So I do think there was a lot more pressure on them internally to do something because there's an election on the horizon, but I think they would have done this either way. You just cannot argue with that line of reasoning.
No, and I think that I think it was a bad idea to begin with, and I'm glad that I'm right. But maybe let's talk about that, about this walk back and the strategy, or what's going through someone's head. As it's sometimes we see opposition scream and shout, as that is their role. There's a difference between listening to that and the public. So how did that impact this, or even some of your experiences in the Notley administration? The public versus the opposition, I think is two very different audiences that really do impact what the government would do.
But when you're in government, or when you're in any position, if you're the opposition or government, it's sort of a combination of both that pushes you to make decisions. Opposition is most effective when they are capitalizing on a sentiment the public already feels. And they can capitalize on a group of people or the majority of the population who's feeling a certain way and take that message on their behalf to push the government to do something. If it's just the opposition, there's just less interest from the media. There's less interest from the public who are picking it up on social media platforms. There isn't the kind of movement or public pressure that a government feels when they, typically are moved to action. And I remember in the Premier's office, you probably saw this as well, there's a daily correspondence update where you kind of see who's contacting the government, why are they contacting the government, is it a form letter, is it a real interaction with the government, or a non-form letter interaction with the government. Yeah, and you see, is this just something that the opposition is pushing, or is this something that the public deeply cares about? And when you have both at the same time, it's pretty hard to ignore.
Oh my gosh, as soon as you said that, I thought about medevac. That was a big one when I was there under Rever. And just so for folks, there's sometimes too where you can see trends of form letter organized submissions. And then it's are they all the same? And just submitted, or is this a concern? And so it's also like not just volume that you have to look at in those offices. It's like, what is the concern? Is it a blanketed response, or is it truly concerns? And then, I mean, obviously the job of the MLAs, with last week being a constit week, right? Yeah. That like they probably got an earful. Right. They also came back, and I'm sure that it's going to be very lively on all sides during committee of the whole of like what actually needs to happen. I want to ask you, though, because I think some of the narrative is that, from this and who we see Bill 20 maybe target a little bit more is Edmonton and Calgary. So how is the NDP? I wanted to ask you this earlier and I didn't, but how do you see them leveraging that going forward, and especially going into how these leadership candidates actually might campaign?
You mean against Bill 20?
Yeah. Like it's an Edmonton, Calgary, right? And I mean, you guys don't necessarily usually have the best attraction in rural, but how do you think that like even the leadership candidates can or will leverage this right now? Or Rachel in her final months?
I don't think that, I don't know what the candidates will do. They're all trying to differentiate themselves, but the party itself has said, no amendment could fix this bill, that it's a bill that just needs to be scrapped because it's such an overreach into the powers and democracy at a municipal level. And I think that that's where the NDP will stay on this. I mean, I don't have insight into whether they're preparing amendments, but so far they've said that the bill just needs to be pulled.
Which isn't uncommon, especially in a two-party system, right?
And I think it works to their advantage because there are a lot of progressive voters in Edmonton and Calgary. The NDP did really well in the last election, Edmonton and Calgary. Much of the representation on council, both councils, is progressive. And so, sort of to look like they're aligning forces to say, we will make sure that your democratic rights are protected. We will make sure that you can elect councillors, that the things that you elected them for, they are able to carry out. I think that that's a really strong place for the NDP to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's important too, is that they're just not going to come with amendments. It's not going to be a bunch of creative ideas to bring this policy to be the best policy it can be. Opposition, and I'm sure leadership will continue to just toe that line of we believe this is bad policy. Okay, so moving on to look at my segues today. Bad policy. Let's go to Bill 6. So
from bad policy to bad policy.
Yeah, this is what we're learning, is that sometimes government has bad policies. It's how you fix it that's actually the most important, or how much you listen to the voters. So yeah, as folks will remember, it was super controversial. Lots of protests outside of the legislature during this time as it was introduced in the first session, I think, of your mandate. So fall of 2015. The bill extended labor rights to farm workers, excluding family farm operations, and completely overlooked the way of life farmers and ranchers in Alberta. So talk about your key stakeholder not feeling like they had a say, or that they were considered during the construction of this legislation. But let's throw to a clip of actually after a lot of this stuff happened, and Rachel Notley addressing head on, kind of similar to what Minister McIver came out saying, is like this was not the intention of the bill. So Rachel Notley talking about how the government approached Bill 6.
But to be perfectly clear, this legislation, Bill 6, does not and was never intended to interfere with families' ability to teach their children about farming and to pass on their way of life. I want farmers and ranchers to know that this legislation will not prevent neighbors from volunteering to help each other out. The legislation will not regulate or interfere with children's abilities to participate in doing chores and contributing to the farm. And the legislation will not interfere in any way with farm kids' ability to learn about and grow within the 4-H system. And the legislation will not require you to register your children with the WCB. It will give you the option to opt in should you choose to, but it will not require it. And the legislation obviously will not regulate how you operate your household. The legislation will not, finally, interfere with recreational activities on the farm. It was, however, a mistake that our intentions and these limitations were not included in the text of the bill. They were always intended to be introduced in regulation. But between what was explicitly stated and what was intended, fear and miscommunication has filled the gap. And I take complete responsibility for that.
I would have liked to see Rick McIver do something like that this week.
Well,
but
I think
there
there
you
was
saw
a drinking game about I did not. How many times did you write "it will not" when you were helping her with this press conference?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, seeing the pictures of the protests outside the legislature and watching that press conference, like my entire chest is tight again. Like this was such a tough, I'm not saying that this wasn't tough for farmers. Obviously,
no, but this
the
is your
people that
lived
were-
experience of just
Yeah, the people that were, worrying about what was going to happen on their family farms suffered through this as well. But, oh, that was a terrible time in the premier's office and could have been avoided. Like all those things that Rachel Notley just listed in terms of, this legislation will not, this legislation will not. Like in a perfect world, you never have to do that. And if you do have to do that, you've done something wrong along the way. And I can say that because I was the communications director at the time, but those were all of the ways that we miscommunicated the bill. That was things that the public thought that the bill did that it did not do. But I think, in hindsight, the NDP has quite humbly admitted that we got it wrong here. And for what it's worth, bringing rights to farm workers was and is the right thing to do. But our communication execution was absolutely terrible, and we overlooked a lot of things, and people absolutely misunderstood what the legislation was intended to do. The legislation that the NDP brought in existed in every other jurisdiction in Canada except for Alberta. And it was intended to ensure that farm workers could refuse dangerous work and that they or their families would receive compensation if they were injured or killed on the job, which, there was many incidents over the course of even the years that I had been working for the NDP where people had been hurt or killed on the job and there was no compensation for their family. So those basic protections exist for every other job you can think of. And it only makes sense that it should be extended to paid farm workers. But where we got it horribly wrong was that we did not clarify that this would be exclusively paid farm workers. This wouldn't apply to kids doing chores on the farm. It wouldn't apply to neighbors helping with harvest. And so people freaked out and said, you do not understand farming. You do not understand our way of life. We're not going to offer WCB to our farmers who come help, or our neighbors who come help us with harvest. And they pushed back, and they pushed back very, very hard. And it forced us to amend the bill to make it very clear that the rights would not extend there. But I will say we never recovered from this, not in rural Alberta.
I think it's been a challenge that, again, even in 2023, I think it was like right before the election kicked off, you and I were doing a panel I think it was like Power and Politics. And yeah, it doesn't give you a lot of legs to stand on because, again, it is this perception. I think that's the thing, too, is like intention versus reality, and intention versus perception is very tough to come back from in politics. The perception was that you didn't understand a family farm, and the legislation kind of screamed that. And so, yeah, I think, and for our listeners, getting a little bit more in to some of the concerns was, again, like the amount of money you would have to pay into these policies to be able to have all of your children trained. If you're, and what happens lots in harvest is people will help each other based on what plot of land is ready to be harvested. And so there's a lot of like community, and beyond like the family itself is the broader family of your community that works together. And I think it was, taken to be a direct insult on, you don't stop telling me how to do my business. I mean, a lot of them, it could have critically impacted their ability to feed their family. And so again, when you have to come out and say it will not, as opposed to this bill will, which is what you always hope for. But I mean, you guys went through the amendment process. It still wasn't, it never really landed as a win. So there is obviously lasting impacts and ways that these policies become more political than ever intended. And the politics in this world doesn't go away, and it gives ammunition to the opposition. So it's a fine line when you're introducing. I always encourage everyone to have like limited pieces of legislation, because there is these trickle down effects that you also don't even anticipate, even though you're surrounded by the smartest people.
But it is the number one job of legislators is to create legislation. So that would be weird if that was not.
Well, I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of times where, like, you see omnibus pieces and it's lumping a lot of things together to be efficient. sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes you can find something or a piece in there. I'm just saying, like, the more you pass, like I think of Jason Kenney, 375 policies that were tracked ongoing. And it was like, well, is that really the best use of the time in government, is to do all of these things, or should we pick a few things? Because it ended up being a ballot box question that you did not intend to be a ballot box question in 2019, or at least in parts of the province.
Yeah, I mean, on Bill 6, obviously we had the opportunity to pull it. We could have just completely walked it back.
Why didn't you?
And I remember being asked the question as a communications director, what do you think we should do? And we were sitting in Paris because we were at the climate, at COP21 at the climate summit there, and having this conversation around the breakfast table saying, what should we do? And I was like, I want to pull it. I want to pull it right now. Yeah. Which is easy when you're just sitting from the side of communication saying, my job is to protect our reputation. My job is to have good stories in the news every day. I go home at the end of the day asking myself, did I win or did I lose today in the 24-hour news cycle? But that's not the way that everyone looked at it. And I'm, in hindsight, glad that there was people at the table, including Rachel Notley, who was there to say, I am not going to let one more farm worker die or be critically injured on the job and have their families not have the compensation they deserve. And she was dedicated to passing that legislation and was willing to take the reputational hit on it because it was the right thing to do. And yeah, I mean, it was the communications around it was incredibly tough, but I still think it was the right thing to do. I just wish that we had thought it through better from the beginning.
It's interesting because in my last role in government, I didn't have the same comms hat, but I mean, I was very much involved with the brand and reputation of the premier and the government. It's interesting because in politics, it always seems to be, if it's not good policy, it's communications' fault. But then communications doesn't ever really get to do it the other way. So I do sympathize with you saying that, because it's like, how is this landing? Very different question than, do I still truly believe in it? I mean, the UCP went on to introduce or amendments to that piece of legislation, which I think still achieves your goal, but in a very different way. So I'm going to say I think it should have been pulled, not because of the traction, but I think it could have been pulled and reintroduced and been done properly. That's an option, but I'm sure you don't want to relive this moment anymore.
But I do want to say, for the record, like, I know most of this gets forgotten, but the bill was amended. There was multiple, and like, I will say props to all the ministers who went to town halls full of frustrated people and let them speak their minds and stood up on stage and took heckling and took questions and took protests to make sure that people could understand what the legislation was. We did roundtables for implementation. We did information opportunities for anyone who was worried about how the legislation would affect their family farms. We did everything we possibly could to make sure the legislation had its intended effect and didn't have unintended consequences. And despite all of that, this is the complaint of all people who work in politics. We get absolutely no credit for it. But that's the way it goes. Sometimes you just go so far that there's no coming back from it, no matter how many of the right steps you take in the future.
So do you think the bill actually got to the right place?
Yeah, I do. I just don't think that everyone understood where it got to. There was a lot of misinformation, some of it perpetuated by the opposition. And a lot of people, busy out in their fields doing their farm work, who weren't watching QP and weren't watching the debate and weren't reading all of the Globe and Mail and Calgary Herald articles. And I think that's perfectly acceptable.
Last topic. We'll make it a little quick today. Switching gears, actually, outside of Alberta and taking it to Ottawa. The federal government has one that could be one of these that we're foreshadowing on how much they're going to have to walk back, given their pushbacks on their proposed changes to the capital gains loss taxes that came out in their last federal budget. So in its budget, the government included plans to tax Canadian companies on 2/3 of their capital gains. This was up from the 50%, which it was previously. So from 50% to 2/3. The changes would have also applied to individual taxpayers when they have gains over $250,000 in a year. Although people will still be able to sell their homes they live in tax-free. So what do you think of this, Cheryl? I usually know where you're going to come at it from and like what you're going to say. So I have no idea what you feel about this, but go ahead.
So I like, my personal feelings aside, the government
No, I want those. I want the feelings. I hate
Okay,
it.
these are my personal feelings. The federal government has a massive hole in its budget. If it wants to offer all of the programs, and it will say that this program will help pay for housing, for access to housing for young people. If it wants to pay for all those programs, it needs to raise revenue somewhere. This is the plight of every government. How do you balance revenue with programs,
I
with
mean, they
spending?
didn't balance it based on their huge
No,
deficit.
not literally balance it, but balance it.
Yeah.
Figuratively speaking, if you want to spend more, you should bring more in. How do they avoid that criticism? And one way to do it without increasing personal tax rates was this capital gains change. And how the government would argue it was to say, this is like an increase on the wealthiest of the wealthiest. This is affecting a very small portion of Canadians who can afford to pay it, and it will help fund programs, that Canada needs right now. I don't know if on a whole that class narrative works in Canada right now, but I do find it very interesting that Pierre Poilievre hasn't taken a position on it. So I think the Liberals are probably onto something, because if there was a massive disconnect with the voting public, I'm sure that by now Pierre Poilievre would have capitalized on it.
I was too busy talking about firing your lobbyists. But
Well, that's part of it.
yeah, no. So I think where we agree is the problem. The problem is a significant debt or ability to be able to pay for the services in which you committed to. I think their rationale for it is we're hitting the 1%, but I actually don't think that's what it does. And I think that's where this policy is getting criticism, right? Like, this lovely woman that was like from Cottage Life or something was talking about the implications because of, I watched a lot of cute little videos of cottage country and how it actually impacted them. So even though the government says it won't, like the transfer of assets of a family cottage that's been in your multi-generational asset that you've passed down, maybe can't be afforded by that individual. It's not the 1% that owns cottages. A lot of times it's through inheritance. So, it's not the rich that's being penalized by that. I think the better thing is the small businesses that have come out. So the biggest criticism, which I think is probably the most valuable or valid, is what it's going to do to the economy. So you're basically saying, like, we don't want small business. We don't want entrepreneurs. We're creating an environment that doesn't help that or to encourage that type of injection or economic impact into our society. So I think that it goes further than beyond just we'll tax the richest of the rich, and it's actually hurting the economy. It's going to hurt investment by saying we're not a stable place to operate, because whenever we overspend, which we have done for, whatever the 10 years or 12 years it's been, 11, no, almost 10. What is it? Yeah, almost 10. That was me doing quick math. But basically in the last decade, all we've done is spend. And so then you're creating this environment for investors that's saying, like, all we do when we can't make bank or balance our own budget is we go back to the rich or find a new way to tax folks and hurt them. Like, I just think it's, especially with affordability, I just think it's a huge miss in thinking, one, you're going to get away with it so quietly announcing it, and two, that they think that this is just one impact, which is taxing the richest of the rich.
So let's just talk about a couple of things you said there. One, I don't think they said this quietly. It was like a pretty big piece of the budget and will be its own standalone
they pivoted
bill.
away. So I guess they
But
talked about
they're
it.
breaking it out so that the opposition has to vote on it as a standalone bill. That's not covering it up or hiding it. If you want to cover something up, you put it in an omnibus bill, as you've suggested. But it's not, you don't break it out and make it a headline. The second thing is your tax rates, in a situation like this, we only don't look good to investors if we are not competitive with other jurisdictions. So as long as Canada remains competitive with other jurisdictions, as long as Canada maintains a good credit rating, neither one of those arguments apply. Like, you're not going to have people flee Canada to environments that are higher taxed. Canada is still a great place to invest. Canada is still a great place to do business. Canada still has a great credit rating.
As it was. One of the things we're known
But
for and
it's
prided
not-
in is
we're-
are the benefit. Like, why?
But it's not a competition with ourselves. It's a competition with other jurisdictions.
Right. But like, I don't understand how you think that it wouldn't impact the economy, whether it's from the growth of a small business that becomes a medium or a large and creates jobs, or the idea that's great, but they are too scared because of the tax. Like, it's not just it's small business, but it's also small businesses' ability to operate here and grow. Why wouldn't you? I think now we're not competitive in the same way. Like, why wouldn't we take that? And we've seen it happen a lot in Canada where businesses get to a certain size and then they go to the US because there's more incentives.
I actually
We're penalizing
thought that
lots of people.
when you said that what the effective narrative against this policy was, I thought you were going to bring up Danielle Smith's narrative.
On the doctors?
About family doctors, because I actually do think, like when I read that,
Oh,
I'm
I
like,
forgot
that
about
makes
that,
a lot of
but thank you.
sense.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
what
yeah.
that is?
So one of the narratives, especially on family doctors, and I thank you for reminding me that we talked about that earlier this week, is one of the narratives that I think that Pierre hasn't been using, but Premier Danielle Smith has, is that this would actually hurt the recruitment or the businesses of family doctors. So as most people know, family doctors, when they operate a clinic, are the entrepreneur of that business. So this would actually impact them and their ability to have their operations and margins, and penalize them more. So that argument, I think, is probably maybe stronger than the one I made earlier, that, you're going after this demographic that nationwide we can say is hurting right now. We need to recruit, we need to retain, we need to give them incentives to continue operating in this model. And that, we're going to go tax you and you're going to get hit super hard when you're already hurting and we're already struggling in this labor force. So let's just pretend I didn't say that other 3 minutes of stuff and that this was my real strong argument that I have. And it's working. I don't know if it's making its way back to Ottawa, but I think at an Alberta level, it's really starting to resonate with family physicians and how they operate their businesses.
Well, we all know if Danielle Smith wants to get Ottawa's attention, she will find a way to do it. Lastly, this is why I don't think Ottawa will walk this back, that Justin Trudeau will walk this back, because we talked earlier about how, when the government really feels pressure, it's from a combined pushback or push from the opposition. And we've just heard Pierre Poilievre is absent in terms of taking a position on this. And it's also the public. And there's new research out that just came out, completed at the beginning of May, that came from Nano's research and shows Canadians are actually split on capital gains. So Canadians are just slightly more likely to say it will weaken the economy than they are to say it's fair and will close the gap between the rich and the poor. And I think when you have that kind of split, when it's, it's not perfectly even, but you're not, pushing away your base and you're not losing the people who had previously supported you, that there probably isn't enough pressure. Like half the population thinks you're doing the right thing. And that's, almost as good as you can ask for when you're in government, is half the population thinks you're doing the right thing. Hopefully the opposition to it gets smaller and, a quarter of the people haven't really paid attention to what's going on. So those things combined make me believe that the federal government feels like they are doing the right thing here. And perhaps this is working with a target group for them, which is young people who are looking for more ability to get into the market and buy houses and be successful.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how this poll changes over time. Again, like with the argument of people seeing it with doctors, if that can grow, I think that could shift the public perception or public polling results as a part of that. Or again, realizing that it's not just the 1%, like what they're setting out to do versus what they are, who's actually going to be impacted by this, I think will be interesting to see if this stays. Again, I don't know the strategy of maybe not having a super aggressive position as conservatives on this, but I guess it goes to show that sometimes bad policy and bad politics doesn't result in backtracking, because a lot of the devil's in the details on all of these, and maybe that hasn't made its way to the public yet. Was
that the moral of the story?
What? Bad politics and bad policy?
And the moral of the story is, thank you.
We have to go back and start once upon a time.
Yeah. Sure. Before we go today, I just did want to get a plug in for the upcoming NDP leadership debate. There's a big leadership debate with all 5 candidates happening in Calgary this weekend, May 11th. And I am very excited to be co-moderating the debate with Red FM's Rishi Nagar. And we're expecting a really a full crowd, an awesome turnout. There's still tickets available, so you can go on the NDP website and get your tickets for that if you're interested in following this leadership debate.
So 2 things. One, very excited for you. Like, that's super cool. So at least when I watch this debate, I won't be bored because I'll be like, my friend's doing something and I can hear her voice. And hopefully this one's a little bit more exciting than the last one, which we will tackle next week's episode, so we can kind of compare and contrast the first non-debate debate where everyone played nice versus maybe this Calgary debate. And if you're going to go and make a sign that says "Go Cheryl," because that's the only person in the room I'm cheering for.
Because I'm the real winner.
Yeah, that's the only person in the room I'm cheering for. So have fun with that. Again, I think it'll be very telling from that debate how people are starting to position, because I think everyone was kind of starting to feel it out, where Sarah Hoffman was the only one I truly believe was there to debate. So, well, that's it for our show. Remember, new episodes drop every Thursday morning at 5 a.m.
And don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram @TheDiscoursePod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.